Welcome to week 4 of organizational behavior and ethics. We're almost at the midway point of this course. I think most of us are falling into the pattern that's designed by this course of the Wednesday, Friday, Saturday timeline. Once you get on top of that, the course starts to move a little bit more smoothly. Last week, I was really interested and intrigued by the writing that you did about ethical leadership in your own ethical behavior in organizations. I was particularly interested in your discussions on the historical moral philosophies. I wanted to review just a couple of things about those philosophies. A number of you talked about utilitarianism, and utilitarianism, most of you defined as the greatest good for the greatest number. Be very careful when talking about utility. It is, as the name indicates, you operate because it's utilitarian to do so. It helps in the situation to move forward. Greatest good for the greatest number, however, does not mean the greatest good for all. The greatest number means that there will be a lesser number that are not served by the act that you are taking or the action that you are taking. For instance, if an organization leads from a utilitarian perspective, and many businesses do a good part of the time, it means that they're going to have to hurt either some customers or some vendors or some employees, either in a layoff situation where they're going to keep the company open and keep most of the employees by laying off a number of them, where they may have to cut an old supplier that was a quality supplier that they can no longer afford because the budget won't tolerate it. Just remember that with utilitarianism there is a cost-benefit analysis, and not everybody wins. And so when you're making your decision as a utilitarian, you must also consider the cost, not just the good of the action, in order to determine if the utilitarian approach is appropriate. It is not always appropriate. At times, leaders have taken pay cuts themselves in order to keep everyone employed, rather than to focus on a more utilitarian decision. Taking a pay cut by leaders would still be a teleological perspective, but it would be more altruistic. We're going to take the hit ourselves in order that our employees don't get hurt. Then there's the deontological. Teleological are based on outcomes or consequences of the act, and deontological does not consider the outcome. Instead of considering the outcome, deontologists consider the good of the action itself, even if the outcome is not what the organization will ultimately desire. It's the right thing to do. It's the just thing to do. It's following the rules. We're not going to break the rules because we know that the government has put in legislation laws that will help us govern in an ethical way. Breaking those laws would be unethical. A deontologist is going to follow the rules, even perhaps if some of those rules might be questionable. They're still going to follow the rules. The 10 Commandments, those are commands, those are rules. A person who follows the 10 Commandments is and thinks about following the 10 Commandments is a deontologist, and will act in that way rather than thinking about perhaps what is the best outcome. The same is true for those who practice virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is not actually about any kind of action at all. It's not about determining what the best consequences are or what the best action is. Virtue ethics is a framework that allows one to look at their own character and say, am I of good character in making this decision? Am I living the values that are important to me as I make this decision? Am I going to be proud to go visit my grandmother and tell her what I did? Those are all in alignment with virtue ethics. Virtue ethics is instilled through community, and an organization that runs on virtue focuses on building virtuous habits of character in leaders and employees and enforcing those. One organization might say that a value is integrity, but if they don't enforce that, if they allow shortcuts, if they look only at outcomes, then they can get into trouble. And that's what you're going to be focusing on this week, how you motivate people to do what needs to be done in an organization. We're going to examine the ethical theories, and then we're looking at an article by Bazerman and Ten Brunsell called Ethical Breakdowns. Ethical breakdowns occur often when we are only trying to motivate, but the motivation itself has created unethical behavior. Pay attention to these ethical breakdowns. Look at them, of course, in the film and in your organization. This week is primarily focused on the movie that you chose to watch as a group. Hopefully you've watched it by now. You'll then be analyzing motivation and ethical breakdowns within the film, but you will also be doing that within your own organizations. The journal is then analyzing, using many of those assessments that you took during the week to analyze your own motivation. So that's the upcoming week. Next week, the following week, you're going to be writing your paper in which you're going to incorporate all of the learnings from weeks 1 through 4. Make sure that you go back and review all of that material before you jump into week 5, which is only going to be writing the paper. As always, please do not hesitate to contact me if you have questions. I am more than willing to have a phone conversation with any of you. We just would need to find a time, and that's not terribly difficult for me to do. I hope you have a great week. Enjoy analyzing the movie and learning about the ups and downs of motivation.